Today's gospel reading is in Matthew chapter 10, beginning in verse 24. This is Jesus talking. The student is not above the teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for students to be like their teachers and servants like their masters. If the head of the house has been called Beelzebul, how much more the members of his household? So do not be afraid of them, for there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the roofs. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Amen. You may be seated. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. In 1964, Nelson Mandela was sentenced to life in prison, and his crime, fighting against apartheid, which was South Africa's institutionalized system of racial segregation and white supremacy. And he spent the first 18 years of his sentence at the brutal Robben Island prison. And among other things, while he was permitted to write and receive only 1 letter every 6 months, secretly, Mandela began writing much more. These secret writings that he was squirreling away were the beginnings of his very first book that this quote comes from, Long Walk to Freedom. And this book wouldn't be published until 1994, 4 years after his unconditional release from prison. He spent a total of 27 years in prison. And it was in these just unimaginably inhumane and torturous conditions that Mandela began to internalize and articulate that courage was not the absence of fear, but triumph over it. He was not theorizing from an armchair in some university study surrounded by books. He was practicing this in real life, in real time, from a prison cell. And he would not minimize or deny fear. He was naming it, facing it head on. And Mandela, in this regard, he is a contemporary witness to the kingdom announcement that Jesus is making here. That Jesus repeats 3 times in our gospel reading, do not be afraid, do not be afraid, do not be afraid. Fear, guys, it's a natural human response. It's even a physiological response. Fear is wired into our DNA in order to protect us. So if we see a bear in the woods, we get rightly afraid, right? Fear is not a sin to be avoided. Oftentimes in church, we treat fear as if it's a sin, and we'll unpack this a little bit. Fear is not a sin to be avoided, but an internal wisdom that tells us that there's something worth paying attention to. Fear is not an indication of like a defective faith, but it's an opportunity to take courage in our Heavenly Father. And this is why I've titled today's sermon, Clarity plus Courage, start over. There it is. You can read. Don't listen to me. Clarity plus care equals courage. Clarity plus care equals courage. Because in the face of fear, the Father provides us with clarity and care that then empowers us with true courage. And if we look at Jesus and his disciples, we see that Jesus and his disciples had very real reasons to be afraid. On kind of 2 levels. First, there were very real human threats. If we take this passage, if we back up just a few verses, Jesus is warning his disciples. It seems like he's bringing all of this up. They were aware of it, but he's naming it. He's warning his disciples about people who he calls wolves. He talks about they need to be aware of local councils and synagogues that are going to interrogate them. How governors and kings will put them on trial. How even family members will betray them. That essentially it's going to feel like everybody hates them. Then we get to our reading today, and in verse 25, Jesus says, if the head of the house has been called Beelzebul, which is like an Aramaic term for what we might call the devil. If the head of the household has been called the devil, how much more the members of his household? That is to say, Jesus is saying, look, if they called me names, they're going to call you names too. If they're going to denigrate you with titles like that, they're going to denigrate you too, and it's not going to feel great. Then in verse 28, he keeps talking about these very human threats that they face. And he says, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Both he and the disciples knew that the violent hand of Rome was always raised and ready to strike. That the violent hand of Rome was always able and willing to kill the body, as Jesus said. So there was these human threats, these very physical and social threats, but there were also spiritual threats, unseen threats. Like if you were to pull back the veil, you would see more. And according to Jesus, these threats are worth more of our fear. That is, if we're going to be afraid of something, be afraid of what you can't see. These threats to our deeper inner selves that Rome or whatever powers may be cannot ever touch with its weapons. In the second half of verse 28, after saying, don't be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul, he then tells his disciples to be afraid. Now let's note this is interesting for a second. 3 times in this passage, Jesus says, don't be afraid. But then did you know that Jesus tells us to be afraid? He says, don't be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Now, this is a dense statement. And so we're going to slow down a little bit. I could preach an entire sermon on this, but I won't. Let me just sum up my thoughts. I follow New Testament scholar N.T. Wright on this one. In reading the one, right? Those 2 words, the one, I read that as not referring to God, but to Satan. Does God destroy people in hell? No. Satan does that. That's the devil's domain. Is it God's desire that anyone should perish like that? No. Who wants that to happen? The devil. Now, I'll point out here, we've been reading from the NIV, the New International Version, which is great as it goes. But the way that the NIV capitalizes one in this verse, I think is terribly misleading. It belies the translator's interpretive bias. And try though they may, all Bible interpreters have some kind of lens that they are reading the original text through. And so somebody in the NIV community thought, well, this must be God, so let's capitalize one. But that was their choice. Many other translations, I would note, do not do this, which is why it's always recommended to read multiple translations, particularly when handling tricky bits, like this verse. You do not need to be afraid of the Father as if he is inclined to destroy you. Some of you guys today, maybe that's all you need to hear, right? You can tune me out from this point on. You don't need to be afraid of the Father as if he's inclined to destroy you. Painting God as this wrathful monster to be feared does not even square with the following verses about sparrows and the hairs of your head. Well, which is it? Does he care about the hairs of my head, or does he want to destroy me? He cares about you. We'll get to that more shortly. N.T. Wright sums up his position on this verse beautifully. God can be trusted with the hairs on your head. He's not out to get you. He's not out to get you. In short, this is what Jesus is trying to paint for his disciples. There is plenty to be afraid of. Human threats, spiritual threats. Yet he says, do not be afraid. Everybody say it with me. Do not be afraid. Nelson Mandela also had very real reasons to be afraid. He entered Robben Island, that prison, in 1964 as a 45-year-old man who had no way of knowing that he would ever leave. He was given a life sentence. And he was confined to a small cell. The stone floor was his bed. He had a bucket for a toilet. Again, he was only allowed to write and receive a letter once every 6 months. And he was permitted only one visitor per year for a 30-minute window. Day after day, he and his fellow political prisoners were condemned to hard labor. So they lived in the cell, but they spent most of their days out breaking rocks in a lime quarry. Mandela, along with many others, suffered permanent eye damage. Have you heard of snow blindness? Right? They called snow blindness because the brightness of the snow can actually damage your eyes. The brightness of the limestone damaged their eyes, just this relentless glare. Some prisoners were assaulted and tortured by guards. Mandela himself had to stay alert for attempts on his life. At one point, the prison warden offered to help him escape, but Mandela recognized and refused it as a trap, because it was. Plenty to be afraid of. But again, what does Jesus say to that, everybody? Do not be afraid. Now, I think it's important to note here that fear comes in many different flavors. It's easy for us to look at the disciples and say, oh man, well, I don't resonate with that, right? Like, I don't have to be afraid like they were. Thanks be to God, we do not for the most part. I don't understand the fear that Mandela faced because I've never been a political prisoner in that way. Well, thanks be to God. And maybe you're looking at your life and you think, I don't know, I'm not really a fearful person. Fear, as like a sort of meta emotion, comes in many flavors. Are you ever terrified? Are you ever suspicious of people? Are you ever anxious or nervous? Do you get scared? Do you get worried? Do you get frightened? Do you sometimes feel timid? Like you have to hold back. Like if I bring my whole self into this moment, what will happen to me? Do you ever feel restless in a place? Maybe you're sitting in church right now and you feel restless. That's a low-level fear. Do you ever feel doubtful? Do you ever feel threatened or feel the fear of threat? If I go here, will I be safe? If I go there, will I be safe? Do you ever feel just wary, cautious like that? Fear comes in many different flavors. And I point this out before I ask us the question. We too have very real reasons to be afraid. And what are your reasons? We all have our own reasons to be afraid. And I won't belabor this point with a litany of fears. My goal is not to stoke our fears this morning, but to help us hear Jesus say, do not be afraid. But we still, just like Jesus is naming the fears that face the disciples, we have to be able to name our own fears. We have to be able to face them. Like, what are you afraid of in your relationships? What are you afraid of? Maybe on Father's Day, what are you afraid of for your kids or your grandkids? What are you afraid of for your parents or for other extended family members? What are you afraid of in your finances? What are you afraid of in your career? What are you afraid of in your body? I know a lot of us, we're getting up there in age. And just getting out and going to church reminds us that we have a lot to be afraid of because our bodies don't work like they used to. What are you afraid of for your state or for your country or for the world at large? Perhaps what are you even afraid of for your church? Whether it's Burns or whether you have another church that you belong to on a regular basis. All that to say, plenty to be afraid of, but what does Jesus say to us? Do not be afraid. Like 3 of you say it, and I think you half believe it. What does Jesus say to us? Do not be afraid. But I want us to understand, even in this passage, Jesus does not simply say, do not be afraid, as if that alone is enough. Sometimes we treat his statements like this as if they're sort of just these like flat commands to be obeyed, like without question, without conversation. But again, Jesus understood his disciples' reasons to be afraid. He understands your reasons and my reasons to be afraid, and so he gives us reasons to be courageous. Specifically, in this passage, Jesus gives us 2 reasons to be courageous. And the first is clarity. Clarity. In verse 26, this is the very first of his do not be afraids. He says, so do not be afraid of them, all those people who can hurt you. Do not be afraid of them, for there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed or hidden that will not be made known. It's kind of a weird thing. Jesus likes to say weird things. If you've ever read the Bible, just get ready for it, right? You know that. He says some odd things. But here's what he means. Jesus says that we can be courageous because a time will come when everything will be uncovered. Lies will be overcome by truth. Confusion will be overcome by clarity. And I think this is important for us, perhaps super important for us today, because in many ways, the ancient Near East was not a whole lot different than today. There were rumors of political corruption. Political and ideological and religious propaganda abounded. News would come of natural disasters 1,000 miles away. They would hear stories of far-off wars. And it would leave them wondering, like, well, was that really true? Who can we really believe? Right? What was reality and what was disinformation? So many questions. And what did such questions create in them? Fear. As these kinds of questions are often designed to do, because fearful people are easy to manipulate and control by those in power. And it's not much different than today. Maybe the only difference is that today we take information at the speed of a screen tap. Whereas it might take weeks or months for some kind of news to get us, today we get it instantly. Not to mention that AI makes disinformation simultaneously easier to produce and harder for the people to detect. And it all just creates fear. Yet Jesus says, one day, everything will be made clear. That day will come when he returns as King of the universe, and every other power that has tried to hide, that has tried to disinform, will be brought out into the light. Clarity drives out fear, just as turning on the lights drives out darkness. On June 19th, 1865, was heard this glorious news: you're free. This past Friday, we just celebrated Juneteenth, which was in Galveston, Texas, on June 19th, 1865. The final enslaved peoples in our land heard the news. They received that clarity. The political victory for their freedom had been secured almost approximately 2.5 years earlier, when President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. They were free, they just didn't know it. It had not been made clear to them. Their chains had been broken, but they didn't see it yet. And yeah, as a society, we still have a lot of work to do when it comes to racial equality, which is why I believe it's important to celebrate such dates as Juneteenth. Our church has adopted Juneteenth as an official holiday that our employees get off for that as well. Sometimes clarity comes really slowly, a lot more slow than we would like it to come. But when it comes, we're free at last. And so Jesus says we can be courageous because a time will come when everything will be uncovered. And so what does Jesus say to us? Do not be afraid. So that's the first reason Jesus gives us to be courageous. The second is care. Yeah, God will bring clarity, like one day, it's off in the future. He has not returned yet, and it's coming. But in the meantime, the Father will watch over his people with loving care now. He will watch over you with loving care now. Here again is Jesus in verse 29 and 30. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside of your Father's care. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. The second reason we have from Jesus to be courageous is because nothing in your life is too small for God to care about. Nothing in your life is too small for God to care about. Nothing escapes his attention and care. He sees everything, every little bird, every tiny hair on your head, every strain in a relationship, every penny in your bank account, or lack thereof, every twinge of pain and weakness in your body, every what if in your mind about the future. Fear has this way of making us feel small and insignificant. Fear has this way of making us feel like just a number, not really seen. I have all this that I'm carrying. Nobody really pays attention. But Jesus says nothing in your life is too small for God to care about. Jesus says to us one more time, do not be afraid. As we come to the table this morning, this is the table of Jesus. It's not the table of the church. It's his table that he has set, that he invites us to. Bring him every little thing as you come. If you care about it, he cares about it too. And we come to this table not only to receive, but we come to give. We come to give to him. We come asking for grace to help us in our time of need, and we're filled with his very life. But we open our hands to hand over our fears, and we receive his clarity and his care.